Welcome to this week's edition of the Belau Report. I'm Jane Belau. We are doing a program on the Historic Preservation Ordinance, one of the proposals to go before the City Council at a hearing. And to introduce the topic, we have Randy Staver, who's the interim president of the Rochester City Council. And we've asked Randy if he will just talk to us about the procedural aspects of this, because obviously he's not taking a position for this proposal or this proposal because he'll be part of the hearing people. So he's just going to talk about the process. And
Right.
Randy, I know we've talked about the ordinance at our monthly report to the people every time for about 6 times. So
true.
how long has this been before the council? And I know you speak with the expertise of a charter commission member and a planning and zoning commission member in your former life. So you must really have a handle on this.
Well, I'd like to think so, and this is a very exciting opportunity for our community, I believe. We've been talking about history and historic preservation for a number of years, and in fact, on a couple of occasions, we've attempted to bring forward a historic preservation ordinance. The timing just wasn't quite right. So here we have another opportunity to engage the dialogue, the community in dialogue, and just see what people feel and think about heritage preservation, and whether or not the City of Rochester should actually enact and have on the books an ordinance speaking to heritage and historic preservation. So I'm really excited about this, and as you say, there's been a discussion over many months and weeks, and this will hopefully bring it to some closure. We're hopeful, and we are going to maintain an open mind, and we look forward to the discussion. In my mind, this particular ordinance has 4 key parts that we'll be looking at. One is the makeup and the credentials of the committee members themselves. 2 would be how properties and areas are designated historic. 3 would be a process for what's permissible and what could change and how that's all governed. And then 4th, how properties or areas are removed from that list. And we appreciate that there are some differences of opinion, and that's what we look to hear, and the merits of either side.
Now, there's not an ordinance that's been prepared for people to react to. These are proposals or ideas and expressing feelings about it.
That's true. We actually have 2 draft versions of the ordinance that we'll be reviewing that have been worked on over the past many months, and essentially 2 different versions. And what we'll be looking at are the differences, and we'll be listening to people make an argument for or against certain changes within that ordinance. Now, what we hope to accomplish at the council meeting, we could take one of several actions. You mentioned the Charter Commission and how we procedurally move through this. We could potentially take no action, which I think would be a bit of a travesty given all the time and energy that's been invested. We could secondarily choose to table or continue the item. Maybe we feel like there's more information to be gathered, more discussion to occur. Or finally, we could take some sort of action that would move this ordinance towards some sort of final language and adoption.
And our panel is going to present one of the proposals, which is come forth from the Rochester Committee for Historic Preservation.
That's true.
And we'll talk to you just before the end of the program so we can find out when the hearing is, where it is, and who can come. We'll be right back. We want to welcome our panel of historic preservationists, and as the big hearing approaches next Monday, this is a chance to hear a proposal that the historic preservationists are making. And I introduce Justin Voss, who is the chair of the Rochester Heritage Committee.
Preservation Committee.
John Kriesel and Kevin Lund, who are both native sons, native stewards, and
Historians.
well, I know historians. I was letting you say that. Historians. All right. And coincidentally, he has the Kriesel auction, and Kevin Lund is also a district judge, and both are longtime friends of the community. And John Kriesel walked in today. They just had the mayor's Medals of Honor luncheon. And here's John Kriesel. He was awarded the Mayor's Medal of Honor. And John, tell our viewers why he gave it to you.
I think he should have given it more thought than he did. But that said, it's as I said after I got the award, I'm here because of those that have come before me and the service that they've given, and I hope that I'm worthy of this. But I think that his criteria possibly had something to do with me being a conscience for Rochester, having participated for a number of decades in fundraising events that give you an idea of the pulse of the community, and I would say that that is why he made that award to me today.
Okay, well anyway, congratulations, because there aren't that many of those medals given, and the conscience of the city, wow.
Well, and you got one, Jane, about 5 years ago.
And I'm sure historic preservation figured into it somewhere.
Yes, it did.
All right, here we go. Justin Voss is the chair of the Rochester Heritage Committee.
Preservation Committee.
And would you talk about what the committee is designed to do? I got to do this right, because what they're looking at is a commission, what they have is a committee. So tell us what the Heritage Committee does.
Okay, so right now there is a current ordinance that established the committee some 30 years ago, I've been told, and our duties and responsibilities are to encourage and promote historic preservation. A large part of that is the educational piece, and we do that in a big way annually with our awards, where we highlight adaptive reuse projects, stewardship, individual achievement, and heritage preservation. And so right now we're looking to upgrade that and establish a commission. So the current ordinance would be replaced with our current proposal, which would expand some of the duties and
How
responsibility.
long has the committee been in place? And I think John or Kevin, would you let us, when did it start, under Mayor Hazama?
It did. It was created by Mayor Hazama, the Historic Preservation Committee. And the charge of the committee was to create a commission, similar to commissions that are in Red Wing and Northfield and a variety of communities. In fact, Rochester is one of the few communities, major communities in the state of Minnesota, that doesn't have a Historic Preservation Commission. And so at that time, I was enlisted by Mayor Hazama and my mother to help draft this ordinance. And I worked on that with Chuck Canfield prior to him becoming mayor. He was on the Historic Preservation Committee. And over a period of about 2 years, we developed this ordinance, and then we presented it to the City Council in October of 1988, and it was voted down. What's curious is that in many respects, the ordinance that is now being proposed next Monday is very similar in terms of its scope and in terms of the protections that it's intended to afford what I think all of us here consider to be a diminishing community resource, and that's historic and architecturally significant, not only buildings but also sites. I would use as an example Soldiers Field, St. Mary's Park, Goose Egg Park, the neighborhoods surrounding those. So it's not just, you know, we're going to save old buildings. This has transcended saving old buildings. It's about creating a vibrancy in the community economically and also visually, so that people who come to our community, it's inviting. And as it is now, there's a major portion of downtown that is just surface parking lots and is not inviting. And we would, you know, I think the people that are really interested in the community growing would like to see that changed somehow. And I think this is the first step that the City Council and the community has to change that dynamic. And I'm hoping that they're receptive to it next Monday night.
And John, do you have something to add?
I would just like to add that thus far the city has funded has funded two consultants, a team of consultants, as to as we move forward, how should we create an interesting fabric within the community. And what is that fabric comprised of? As Kevin has said, it's not only, it goes beyond buildings, it goes beyond neighborhoods, and it goes to the parks. Both of these consultants and teams of consultants have said to have vibrancy within a city, you want to have not only unique small businesses, but you also want to have people on the street. The council has recently approved approximately $10 million for destination medical. And that has to do with how are we going to make our community a destination. That destination has to go beyond just letting everybody know that the medical team is here for you, but it wants to be attractive to the people that come and visit this community. And I would ask this, why do people enjoy going to Lake City, Lanesboro, Hastings, Red Wing? There is something beyond just the buildings themselves. It makes a statement of those that have come before us. And so we're talking about following the master plan that's been adopted by the city of Rochester, which has to do with trying to determine what is historic in nature, what are landmarks, and how do we put people on the street. Our plan goes along with that plan.
Okay, Justin Voss, the Rochester Heritage Preservation Committee has been successful in what?
Well, up to this point, again, like what Kevin was saying, we've spent the last 2.5 years developing the current draft of the ordinance. And so I think we've been successful in gaining support from community, from the core neighborhoods. And so this is a proposal that fits Rochester really well. It's the least restrictive, or if it's adopted, it'll be the least restrictive heritage preservation ordinance in Minnesota. Some have said that you know, have you gone too far in negotiating? And I would say that we haven't. We haven't given in to what others have proposed as an alternative for being completely voluntary and meaningless. So I think we've been successful in kind of meeting everybody's needs.
When you say voluntary in that the commission would not say your property is hereby historic, therefore you can't do that. There's no taking, is there?
There isn't. I mean, that's the smoke and mirrors that the chamber and the Mayo Clinic have engaged in. And it's been going on as long as I've been advocating historic preservation in this community. They have somehow, well, let me back up. They've now created this entity, which in my opinion is quite smug and condescending, the Alliance for Responsible Preservation. And their opt-in, opt-out ordinance is no ordinance at all. It is not a change at all in what's been going on in this community. And for them to try to stand up and say, we're all for historic preservation, this is a meaningful document, is baloney. There's nothing meaningful about their document. And I think that I'm hopeful that the council will kind of pierce through that smoke and mirrors and make a decision that's in the best interest of Rochester, which transcends the Mayo Clinic, transcends the handful of people that run the Chamber of Commerce. And I think the power to make these decisions is in this document. The power lies with the City Council, and that's where the power should go back to. And this thing has been misconstrued and distorted beyond recognition by virtue of this propaganda, which I'm going to call a campaign that the now so-called Alliance has created. And so, again, we need something, and in Mayor Brady's eloquent words, we need a meaningful heritage preservation ordinance. And I don't know what the powers that be, the unelected powers that be, are really afraid of. They have nothing to be afraid of. It's, in my mind, historic preservation, if you look at the statistics, it's a great economic benefit. It serves as an incubator for small businesses because the square footage per square foot rent rate is decreased. It brings a vibrancy to communities to restore these buildings. It's a great economic benefit, and they have somehow tried to couch this in terms of it's an unfunded mandate. Nothing could be further from the truth. It's somehow some overwhelming regulation. We're taking people's property rights away from them. Nothing could be further from the truth. I'll turn it over to John.
I would like to just touch on a couple of points as a further explanation of what's been discussed thus far. Justin had said a little bit earlier, or maybe it was Kevin, that thus far this community does not have a ordinance, and an ordinance, at least in my mind, means that you are within it. I mean, it is an automatic opt-in. I mean, I would assume if ordinances are not in that regard, then people would want to opt out of parking tickets or speeding tickets or whatever. But just to say that something is an ordinance, it means that you're going to be part of it. That said, when we have a ordinance that was proposed by the Alliance for, what was it? Alliance for Sensible? Responsible, excuse me. So does that mean that everything prior to that was irresponsible?
That's the implication. That's the implication.
That's what I thought. That said, we are not talking about an ordinance that would take the ability of any particular property owner away from completely transforming the interior. We are only talking about exterior modifications or demolition. That what we're asking for is if it's going to have a severe exterior modification, such as the ephes that was put on the Woolworths building, part of the funding of which was done by the city of Rochester, that there would be a public discussion prior to that. Or if it's going to be demolished, there would be a discussion prior to, let's say, having a demolition permit issued, so that the public have got an opportunity to be proactive rather than reactive. Thus far, Jane, all these past decades, and let's just say 5 decades, there has not been an opportunity for the public to be heard and to become involved. It's always been after the fact, especially with, let's say, the master planning of the Mayo Clinic, that announcements are made, things happen, such as, I'm just going to say, when the post office was taken away from us. There was no public discussion. I think that was epic at that particular point in time. So we're asking for a public discussion prior to severe modification of a structure that's deemed a landmark or historic.
Okay.
Nothing more than that. It can still be demolished.
So there's an 11-member commission that's proposed by the Historic Preservation and the committee.
Yep.
And this committee would then approve a list or a map or of what are regarded as...
So the designation process would be more an individual property basis. So if somebody comes forward and says, I would like to suggest this property and initiate the designation process, that process goes in front of the public for a public hearing. After that, the Preservation Commission can recommend it to the City Council whether they, think it's a good fit for designation or not. If obviously the property owner has, the way the ordinance is written, has significant weight and deference. So if they're opposed to it, it's a higher threshold to become designated. Ultimately, if it gets in front of the City Council and the property owner is still saying, hey, I'm opposing this, there's a 2/3 majority vote that has to take place in order for it to become designated. So, there's flexibility there, and it protects the property owner's rights.
Is there a proposal at all for funding, for incentives? The coalition, which is made up of the Alliance for Responsible Preservation, the Chamber, READY, Rochester Downtown Alliance, the Southeast Minnesota Realtors, the Rochester Area Builders, and Mayo Clinic, they say that you should have incentives. That this is really important, that under their plan, if a property owner should have incentives for meaningful preservation.
As far as carrots go, you know, this ordinance is made up of carrots and sticks. As far as our proposal, there are carrots there. There's legacy grants that can be written and applied for funding historic context surveys. Right now, the Plummer House is going through an HVAC upgrade. That's being partially funded through a legacy grant. That if a property is on the National Register, and they're
That's what I was going to ask about, the federal one that designates historically significant properties. And then what does that do? Is this preempt any local designation, or?
Well, there's a bit of a myth about National Register listing. There's no protection that comes with that listing. You get access to the state and federal tax credits, so if you're going to do a major rehabilitation, you get access to funds that way. But as far as protection, that's got to come from a local level.
Okay, so
I think, Justin, it protects the particular facility from being demolished with the use of any federal tax dollars, such if there's, I believe, is that right,
That
Kevin?
is true.
Yeah, I think that's the only protection that a facility has. It can still be demolished, it can be modified, but federal tax dollars cannot be used once it's on the, has the national landmark status.
okay.
Well, let me follow up on that. There is inherently in historic preservation an economic benefit. You don't really need to incentivize it. And the so-called alliances proposed opt-in, opt-out ordinance has no incentives in it at all. I just want to read something because Jeff Allman is a friend and someone who's done some remarkably good things in this community with historic structures, particularly City Hall, which I think is in sharp contrast if you stand down on 3rd Street where John's building is and look at City Hall compared to the EFIS surfaced hotel. If you like that EFIS surfaced hotel, then you should be all for the opt-in, opt-out. If you like something that has some texture and patina, then you should fall on the side of the Historic Preservation Committee's ordinance. But let me tell you what Jeff wrote. And this was over this, for lack of a better term, the kerfuffle, which I think turned into a tragedy about the destruction of the Williams home up on 5th and 5th. He says, over the years I have owned over a dozen buildings, including 6 on the National Register. 10 of these projects required a public subsidy via TIF, small community block grant, EDA loans, federal historic tax credits, accessibility tax credits, energy tax credits, utility rebates, and similar government incentives. This credibly demonstrates that there are many ways already in place to preserve these properties rather than raise them. I think that's an important point to make about this carrot and stick approach that the Chamber and Mayo have taken. Because, you know, let's be honest, they're the driving forces behind this alliance. The rest of them are, in my mind, kind of along for the ride, to be honest.
Okay, the time is really flying by. When you talk of something of this magnitude, it's hard to do it in a half an hour. But what are the points that you would like the city, by means of the reporting, and the city's elected officials at the hearing to remember? And Kevin, I'll start with you.
Well, I think the most important thing to remember, number one, is that this is not an infringing upon individual property owners' property rights. This is about protecting things that we have identified, the community and the city council ultimately has identified as really important structures as part of our heritage. The other thing is, I think, to totally integrate the master plan and destination medical community. It's not destination Mayo, it's medical community, which is Rochester. It's all of us. I think to give true meaning to that, as is stated in the master plan, the cornerstone has to be historic preservation. And we've not gotten where this community needs to be by virtue of how we've handled it to this point. And I think we need a new directive from this point forward. I think that's the sharp contrast between the two proposals that the City Council will have to determine.
Okay. John Kriesel.
I would say in moving forward, we want to ask ourselves, what would make this community more attractive to the visitors that come here, approximately 1 million a year? And that suggestion, I think, leads someone to think about the parks, thinks about the buildings, thinks about the river, thinks about the river walk, thinks about the fabric along that way that the visitor comes here. And I think that afterwards a person will come away from that in saying, as Kevin has pointed out particularly earlier, that EFS is not something attractive. You can go to any community and you can see that. This is an incredible community. I look at it as a vibrant think tank for the world, so therefore we move forward with more caution and pay attention to what all of our assets are, and our assets are each other. Destination Medical is comprised of this whole community, and it goes beyond just the inner core of buildings that are necessary for the Mayo Clinic, however, are not of human scale.
Okay. Let me ask you 2 quick questions related to the proposal of the Alliance for Responsible, the builders and the Chamber and the Mayo. And there will be owner consent in your proposal?
In our proposal, no.
Yes.
There's not owner consent in our proposal. It is in their proposal.
Okay. All right. Incentives or eligibility for incentives, are they there?
I think, like I highlighted, you don't need an ordinance to get access to tax credits, legacy
Okay.
grants.
All right, and then will the commission include property owners? Well, of course it will, right?
It has to.
The-
It's they
that's-
serve at the pleasure and discretion of the mayor.
Okay.
And I think that the current draft has included representatives from the Chamber and from Mayo and all these other groups that should have a voice in this. I just think it should be an honest voice. Let's put it that way.
Okay, now, would you like the hearing people to remember on Monday?
Sure. I guess I'd just like to say that let's keep this an inclusive process. Let's include everybody. I think our proposal gives the little guy a voice in all this, whether it's a seat on the commission or the open transparency of public hearings. And really, I think this hits hard at a bigger point. Let's plan out our future a little more long term. Let's think about how we can reuse these buildings instead of knocking down something, putting up something that's going to last 20 years, and then we're starting over again.
Okay, I want to thank all 3 of you. We're out of time.
Thank you.
And Kevin Lund and John Kriesel and Justin Voss, thank you all 3. And the hearing, we're going to talk just briefly with Randy Staver, interim council president, about the time and place of the hearing. We'll be right back. Interim City Council President Randy Staver, thank you for the introduction to the subject tonight. And now, what do people need to know to be able to come to the hearing and follow this?
All right, just a reminder, the council meeting will be on Monday, December 17th, beginning at 7 p.m. And that's when we'll have the public hearing related to the Heritage Preservation Ordinance. Of course, ahead of that meeting, by Friday afternoon, individuals can take a look at the packet, the agenda for the meeting, and take a look at the same information that we'll be considering on Monday the 17th. So we do encourage people to come out. One plea that I make for folks is that, give it some thought. Let's have some intelligent conversation about this. And we understand it's a passionate topic for some folks, but we really are looking for that dialogue, and we really appreciate the interaction with the public.
So it's 7 p.m.
7 p.m. on Monday, December 17th.
And I'll bet you're suggesting people who'd like a seat come early.
I would if I were them. I have a guaranteed seat, so.
Oh, I know you do, right in front, right in front. Randy Staver, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, our viewers, for being with us this evening. We'll be with you again next week, same time, same channel. In the meantime, have a very good week. Have a very good night.